A bruised light crept across the Brimstone Peninsula, revealing what the first clash had left behind. Smoke lay heavily upon the eastern front, moving in slow ribbons through the ruins and gathering beneath the splintered remains of the Fusiliers' Pavises. Blue and gold bodies filled the spaces between those shattered shields. Farther along the crossing, the gallants rested where the Blood Warriors had broken their charge, their armor dulled beneath ash and drifting soot. Among them stood the Deathbringer. Spellfire had blackened his plate. Cannon shot and grenades had opened deep rents across his armor, while blood ran freely through the damaged joints and collected around his boots. Still, both hands remained fixed around the Kingslayer axe. Each breath of wind drew fresh smoke from the scorched metal covering him. Across the ruined approach, Ignatius Vaelor remained mounted beneath the smoldering sky. The formations that had protected him during the first advance had vanished. Only broken shields and scattered weapons stood between the Magister and the warriors who had sworn to claim his skull. Nearby, Skull Reapers moved among the dead, severing trophies from the fallen Fusiliers and fastening them to hooks and chains. Their daily oath remained unfinished. Several skulls already hung from their belts, swaying gently wherever they turned toward the Sigmarite survivors. A different struggle waited in the west. Barely a few paces separated the Blood Reavers from the Steelhelms. Both formations had spent the closing moments of the previous engagement staring across that narrow divide, close enough to see chips along the shield rims and the streaks of drying blood across exposed faces. 5 ranks had become fewer for the Steelhelms. Gaps remained where the Slaughter Priest's curse had ruptured their line, though practiced hands had drawn the survivors together and restored the wall. Shields overlapped once more. Spears extended between them. Behind that battered formation, grenadiers waited with powder charges secured and bardishes held ready. Facing them, the Blood Reavers shifted like hounds straining against a chain. Sacrificial blood still coated their arms. Some crouched behind crude shields, while others leaned into the open ground, axes lifted, eyes fixed upon the soldiers opposite them. Rage had carried them beyond caution. Every wound promised only another reason to close the distance. Towering behind the mob, the Slaughter Priest watched the banners of Sigmar through a haze of heat. Sorcery had poured across the peninsula since the battle began. Vaelor and the Aqshian pyromancer had filled the air with incantations, manifestations, and living flame. Their spells offended the creed of Khorne, and the priest's hatred rose with every arcane gesture. To the south, the iron-walled Great Cannon stood beside an ancient place of power, its crew already moving around the carriage. Powder was measured, shot rested near the wheels. Tools passed from hand to hand with methodical speed. Farther toward the center, the Alchemite Warforger held the contested rise alone. Beyond him, half hidden among the trees and low smoke, the Wrathmongers began to turn in his direction. Before the Bloodbound could resume their advance, the Cities of Sigmar seized the initiative. Orders traveled rapidly along the surviving line. Horn calls sounded from the west. Officers raised weapons and redirected formations toward the ground that still remained within their grasp. Working from the center, the Alchemite Warforger opened the runic crucible mounted across his back. Brass arms unfolded with a sequence of metallic clicks. Glass chambers brightened as alchemical vapor circulated through them, and lines of fire traced the symbols engraved along the apparatus. When he brought his staff down against the earth, the crucible answered with a sudden burst of white light. For an instant, that energy reached towards the weapons of the Steelhelms. Then a runic plate fractured. Light escaped through the broken symbol and scattered into sparks. One of the valves burst open, surrounding the Warforger in a cloud of pale vapor. Along the western formation, the faint glow gathering upon swords and spear points faded into ordinary steel. With one hand, the Warforger forced the damaged valve closed. The steel helms tightened their formation and prepared to advance without the promised enhancement. Elsewhere, the Aqshian pyromancer had fixed his attention upon the Deathbringer. Embers from the first incineration still lived beneath the Khornate commander's armor. They glowed deep with split plates and scorched leather, waiting for the spellcaster who had placed them there to summon their final heat. One measured gesture awakened them. Thin, orange lines appeared around the Deathbringer's shoulders. Fire crawled through the cracks in his breastplate and along the seams protecting his waist. As the light spread, it traced every wound inflicted during the open round. He lowered his gaze towards the flames. A moment later, they erupted. White-orange fire burst from the joints of his armor. It streamed through the eye slits of his helm and climbed the jagged ridges of his plate. Brass icons curled beneath the heat. Leather straps shrank and snapped. Blood warriors nearest to him drew back as the temperature surged. Within that inferno, the Deathbringer raised his axe. For a fleeting moment, his immense silhouette stood against the blaze, the Kingslayer lifted overhead as though he meant to strike down the fire itself. Then the spell reached its culmination. Armor split apart with the sound of breaking iron. One shoulder plate spun through the air and struck the ash several paces away. Burning hands released the Kingslayer axe, which landed beside the bodies of the gallants with a deep, final note. What remained of the Deathbringer collapsed beside him. Fire continued to move across the ruined plates, consuming trophies and scraps of crimson cloth. By the time the brightness receded, the warrior who had annihilated the gallants had become a blackened shape among his victims. Around him, the Blood Warriors closed ranks as they lifted their axe blades towards the Sigmarite line. From behind the surviving formations, Vaelor drew upon the greater fires of Aqshy. Both hands rose, and the smoke above him began to rotate. Ash spiraled inward. Loose embers left the ground and joined the gathering current until a broad skull emerged within the darkened air. Flame emerged larger than a warrior's torso, the burning skull descending to Vaelor's right and hovering above the earth. Its eye sockets glowed like open furnaces. Sparks streamed from its crown, while an orange radiance moved through its open jaws. At the Magister's feet, the ground cracked. A narrow emberstone sliver rose from the fissure, carrying a deep light within its blackened surface. Vaelor drew the fragment into his gloved hand and secured it among the instruments at his belt. Across the battlefield, the slaughter priest felt the manifestation arrive. Khorne's scorn surged through him. Raising his ritual weapon, he directed the blood god's contempt toward Vaelor and the pyromancer. The prayer swept across broken walls and smoke-filled ground, reaching for the two wizards. Distance and ruin carried them beyond his grasp. His hatred found only empty air. Turning toward the burning skull, the priest planted his feet and began the rite of banishment. Rust-colored light gathered around his blade. Skulls hanging from his belt knocked together as the force of the prayer passed through him. Above Vaelor, the manifestation shuddered. Flames bent inward. Light within its eye sockets narrowed to two thin points. For several seconds, the skull appeared to collapse beneath the pressure. Then its jaws opened. A wave of heat rolled across the eastern front, breaking the slaughter priest's hold. Flame rushed back across the skull's surface, brighter and fiercer than before. With the prayer spent, the priest lowered his weapon and roared toward the wizards beyond his reach. Around him, a battered horn answered. Its note traveled across the western ground, deep enough to disturb the ash beneath the feet of the blood reavers. A ragged standard rose beside it, calling scattered warriors back toward the formation. Four shapes emerged through the haze. One blood reaver limped heavily. Another wore a blood-soaked wrapping around his head. Wounds had marked each of them during the opening advance, yet the horn drew them onward. They rejoined the host beneath the lifted banner. Axes struck shields in welcome. Voices rose. Bodies pressed together, filling the spaces left by cannon fire and sacrifice. Fresh rage flowed through the formation. Survival had become a distant concern. The reavers offered exposed flesh to steal in exchange for the chance to strike, while the blood haze surrounding them sharpened every axe into a potential instrument of sudden death. Against that swelling mob, the Steelhounds began to march. The reduced formation crossed the western ground with shields joined and spears angled forward. Officers kept the line intact over loose stone and deep cracks, guiding the soldiers towards the enemy that had waited since the opening moments of the battle. Grenadiers followed in their wake. Leaving the cover of the forest, they spread into a staggered line behind the shields. Powder charges knocked softly against their belts. Heavy bardages rested against their shoulders. South of the place of power, the great cannon began its own advance. Crewmen strained against ropes and wooden levers, guiding the massive weapon over the uneven ground. Iron-bound wheels carved deep tracks through the air. Once the carriage reached its stable position near the center, wedges were hammered beneath it, and the barrel turned toward the eastern approaches. Meanwhile, the Warforger abandoned the safety of the rise. Carrying his damaged crucible into enemy territory, he ran toward the central objective. Steam escaped in short bursts from the repaired valve behind him, and broken brass arms rattled against his harness. Reaching the contested ground, he planted his staff and claimed it through presence alone. From the forest edge, the Wrathmongers saw the isolated figure and changed direction. Barbed chains dragged through the ash as they began to close. Their broad silhouettes appeared and vanished behind dark trunks, every step drawing them near to the solitary defender. Above the eastern front, the burning skull remained beside Vaelor. Its blazing gaze followed the blood warriors. With the gallants destroyed and the fusiliers reduced to corpses, the Aqshian pyromancer sought protection elsewhere. Moving north, he crossed the place of power and the great cannon, using ruined stone and drifting smoke to shelter his withdrawal. Behind the western shield wall, the grenadiers halted and raised their weapons. Several barrels settled upon the slaughter priest. His tall frame rose above the reavers, broad enough to mark him even through the shifting crowd. Yet too many warriors filled the ground between them. The officer redirected the volley toward the host. 10 shots crossed the field. Most vanished into shields, smoke, and broken earth. 4 found their mark. 2 blood reavers fell from the leading ranks. One pitched forward with a smoking wound through his chest. Another spun beneath the impact, releasing the standard as he struck the ground. The crimson cloth folded into the ash. Before the banner could be trampled, another reaver seized the pole and hauled it upright. Nearby, the unit's champion remained untouched. He raised his axe toward the grenadiers, marking the soldiers who had fired upon them. At the center, the great cannon trapped the Wrathmongers. Branches and thick smoke obscured the warriors as they moved through the forest edge. Their shapes broke apart among the trunks, denying the gunner a clear target. The barrel shifted west. Beyond the Steelhounds stood the slaughter priest. Powder entered the chamber. Shot followed. Ramrods withdrew as the crew stepped clear. Still focused upon the approaching shield wall, the priest lifted his ritual blade. The cannon fired. Its first shot struck the ground beside him. Stone, ash, and fragments of iron rose in a violent column. The blast hurled the slaughter priest from his feet and scattered the nearest reavers. Before he could regain his footing, a second shot crossed the battlefield. Impact swallowed him. Dark earth erupted where the priest had fallen. His ritual weapon spun from the cloud and landed several paces away. Brass icons scattered through the crater, and a broken chain slid down its edge. When the smoke thinned, the slaughter priest lay motionless among the shattered stone. Khorne's final commander had fallen. Far to the east, the Deathbringer burned among the gallants. In the west, cannon smoke rolled over the remains of the priest. Leaderless warriors filled the ground between them, yet the advance continued. Above Vaelor, The burning skull opened its jaws. Flame streamed across the eastern approach and washed over the blood warriors. Heavy armor absorbed most of the blast, though one warrior caught its edge beneath his arm. Fire entered through the gap, scorching flesh and leather before he staggered clear. Smoke rose from the ground. The warrior reset his grip upon his axe and resumed his advance. Having expended part of its own essence, the manifestation dimmed. A black crack opened across one side of the skull as several tongues of flame withdrew into its hollow interior. Along the western front, the steel helms lowered their shields and charged. This time, the ground offered a clear path. Boots hammered against black stone. Spear points remained level. With the last few paces closing rapidly, the blood reavers rushed to meet them. Both formations collided with a crash of iron and timber. Behind the steel helms, grenadiers secured the rear while the shield wall forced itself into the bloodbound mats. At the center, wrathmongers burst from the forest. Their chains circled overhead as they crossed the objective toward the warforger. Alone beneath the damaged crucible, he turned to receive them. The first warrior entered reach. A sweep of the warforger's staff caught him across the chest. Heated metal burned through armor and flesh, twisting the wrathmonger sideways without breaking its momentum. The others arrived around him. Within moments, the warforger stood enclosed by hooked weapons, chains, and towering bodies. In the west, the blood reavers answered the steel-helm charge with wild-eyed brutality. Fury carried them against the shield wall. Axes hammered down from every angle, seeking gaps around helmets, shoulders, and overlapping plates. 30 blows descended. For several seconds, the formation held. Then one shield split along its rim. A hooked axe caught the soldier behind it and dragged him into the horde. Another reaver climbed over a fallen body and struck into the second rank. Openings spread through the line faster than officers could close them. 9 steel helms died beneath the assault. What remained of the formation contracted into a tight cluster. 5 soldiers stood among their fallen companions, shields coated with blood and scarred by repeated impacts. Axes pressed toward them from every side. Even so, they answered. Spears thrust through the crowded bodies surrounding them. One blood reaver fell with a blade through his chest. Another died while climbing across a broken shield, his raised axe slipping from lifeless fingers. For a moment, the 5 survivors regained a narrow circle of ground. Elsewhere, the wrathmongers closed upon the warforger. Chains struck his harness. Barbed weapons tore through the plates protecting the crucible. One glass chamber shattered, spilling burning fluid across the stones. A hammer blow drove him onto one knee. Using the staff as a brace, he forced himself upright. Blood moved beneath his armor. Sparks snapped from the broken apparatus at his back. Around him, wounded wrathmongers tightened their circle. By the end of the city's advance, only 2 objectives remained beneath Sigmarite control. Their commanders had struck hard. Fire had consumed the Deathbringer. Cannon shot had destroyed the Slaughter Priest. Yet across the peninsula, the surviving Bloodbound remained in motion. Every death strengthened the current running through them. Blood seeped into the ash. Skulls rested among shattered shields. Rage passed from one formation to another until Khorne's favor became almost tangible upon the field. Around the Wrathmongers, that power gathered first. Fresh blood coated their weapons and armor, darkening the iron and sharpening their violence. The Warforgers' resistance had drawn them fully into the frenzy. Near the western melee, the Blood Reavers uncovered an emberstone sliver beneath the churned earth. One warrior dragged it from the ash and raised it overhead. Heat moved from the fragment into the weapons surrounding him. Axe edges brightened with the deep orange glow, while sparks ran along chipped blades and crude iron heads. Across the eastern ruins, Skull Reapers advanced towards Ignatius Vaelor. Their route carried them beyond the bodies of the Fusiliers and into Sigmarite territory. Fresh trophies swung from their belts as they moved, though their oath still demanded more. Vaelor offered a skull worthy of their count. Blood warriors marched alongside them. Scorched fragments of their commander's armor lay behind. Before them stood the wizard whose fire had destroyed him. Their pursuit of the marked fugitive had survived the Deathbringer's fall. Along the western edge, another band of blood reavers left the forest. They had waited behind the slaughter priest's original host throughout the first advance. Now, with the priest dead and the battle raging ahead, they poured into the open and moved toward the surviving steelhounds. As they approached the melee, their path carried them beyond the shield wall and toward the grenadiers waiting behind it. From the south, the great cannon shifted again. Its crew dragged the weapon toward the nearest objective and established it directly before the place of power. Once the wheels were secured, the barrel turned towards the Skull Reapers advancing upon Vaelor. Covering fire thundered across the eastern approach. Shot after shot struck the ground in front of the Khornate warriors. None found flesh, although each impact tore another crater through their path. Stone fragments rained across their armor. Ash rose in thick curtains, forcing the Skull Reapers to slow and spread as they crossed the devastated ground. Those missed shots bought Vaelor distance, but they could not stop the Blood Warriors. Moving past the damaged, burning skull, the armored followers of Khorne charged directly toward him. Firelight reflected across their plate as the narrow approach forced them into a dense formation. One warrior found himself trapped behind the manifestation and the bodies of his brothers. Every route into the fight closed before him, leaving his axe raised above a battle he could not reach. The others pressed onward. Skull Reapers attempted to follow, but the cannon's bombardment had transformed the ground ahead into a maze of pits and shattered stone. Their charges slowed among the craters, leaving Vaelor beyond the sweep of their weapons. In the west, Blood Reavers raced past the remnants of the Steelhelm formation toward the Grenadiers. Then the 5 surviving soldiers raised their voices. Their officer struck his sword against his shield and called a challenge across the melee. The sound rang above the clash of weapons, drawing the fury of the passing Bloodbound. Axes turned toward him. Warriors who had been closing upon the Grenadiers altered course and crowded into the struggle around the Steelhounds instead. Through that defiance, 5 soldiers drew an entire flank toward themselves. Emberstone flamed among the reavers. Heat passed through their axes, lending brutal accuracy to every swing. 26 attacks fell upon the last defenders. Shields split under the impact. Spears disappeared beneath the mass. One steel helm was dragged sideways into the crowd as another fell upon the bodies behind him. Their officer remained visible for a few final seconds, sword rising and falling above the mob. Then the horde closed over him. When the Blood Reavers pulled apart, the western shield wall had vanished. Only bodies and broken blue and gold shields remained where the formation had stood. Beyond them awaited the Grenadiers. Freed from the protection of the Steelhelms, they stepped forward with bardishes lowered. The Blood Reavers had exhausted their charge upon the final defenders, compressing themselves into a tight and exposed mass. Sigmarite steel entered them. Broad blades swept through the unprotected bodies. Grenadiers maintained their spacing, striking in measured arcs and advancing over each fallen warrior. One reaver collapsed. Another followed. The remaining Bloodbound attempted to raise their axes within the confined ground, but the bardishes reached them first. Steel rose and fell until the last warrior lay among the bodies of the Steelhounds he had helped destroy. Khorne accepted those deaths alongside the rest. Fresh favor gathered over the western field. Near the place of power, a different punishment descended. The great cannon occupied its prepared position beyond the immediate fighting. The Aqshy pyromancer sheltered among the nearby ruins, separated from the press of combat. Khorne's wrath reached them. Rust-colored energy erupted beneath the cannon carriage, splitting timber and tearing iron fittings from the wheels. Crewmen staggered away as the weapon lurched against its braces. A second surge lashed through the pyromancer. Fire, unlike his own magic, burned across his robes and skin, a violent answer to his distance from the slaughter. Meanwhile, Vaelor faced the Blood Warriors. They surrounded his battle mount beneath the fading light of the manifestation. Axes struck armor, harness, and warding steel. Vaelor reached for the Emberstone sliver. Fire gathered around his hand. The Blood Warriors came through it. Red armor crowded the Magister from every side. An axe struck his raised arm. Another found the gap beneath it. Losing his seat, Vaelor fell from the mount and struck the scorched ground among their boots. Above him, the burning skull began to fail. Cracks spread across its surface. Light within its eyes guttered as the magic binding it to the battlefield unraveled. A Blood Warrior raised his axe over the fallen Magister. The final blow drove Vaelor from the battle. At once, the manifestation collapsed. Its blazing form broke into embers that scattered over the warriors below and vanished before reaching the earth. The obstacle blocking the rear Blood Warrior disappeared with it. He stepped forward at last. Vaelor already lay defeated. His brothers filled the ground around the fallen wizard, leaving no enemy within reach of the waiting axe. Though removed from the field, the Magister's life had not reached its conclusion. Some stubborn remnant of power preserved him beneath the wounds, carrying his fate beyond the present clash. The fugitive had been brought down. At the center, the Warforger made one final attack. Weariness dragged at his movement. His staff traveled in a short arc toward the Wrathmonger nearest him, only to be caught against the haft of a barbed weapon. The blow slid harmlessly aside. Chains wrapped around the staff and tore it from his hands. Hammers struck the remaining plates of the runic crucible. Hooked blades opened the harness across its shoulders. A barrage of blades descended upon the isolated defender. Alchemical flame burst from the damaged apparatus as the Wrathmongers overwhelmed him. Steam and burning vapor swallowed the center of the objective, concealing the final moments of the struggle. When the haze cleared, fragments of the crucible littered the ground. The Warforger had been annihilated. Wrathmongers stood over the wreckage, their weapons drenched and their frenzy fulfilled. By degrees, the noise of battle diminished. Smoke rolled across the place of power. The damaged great cannon leaned heavily upon its fractured carriage. Nearby, the wounded pyromancer withdrew deeper into the ruins. Grenadiers remained in the west, surrounded by the blood reavers they had destroyed and the steel helms they had failed to save. Across the eastern ground, Vaelor's mount stood riderless and demolished. Blood warriors occupied the place where the Magister had fallen. Beyond them, Skull Reapers emerged from the cannon's craters and searched the battlefield for fresh trophies. At the center, Wrathmongers claimed the objective over the remains of the Warforger. One by one, ragged crimson standards rose across the peninsula. 5 strategic approaches now rested beneath the shadow of Khorne. By the end of the second battle, the Bloodbound held the field. Their leaders had become offerings. Their slaughter had become command.